In October 2020, we made history at the Southmorton Boxing Club by staging the world's first behind-closed-doors white-collar boxing show. We got over 10,000 views on the night across 103 countries. Now we're bringing the live rumble back, bigger and better than before. Follow the fighters in the build-up and vote on the night for your favourites. See all the thrills, spills and skills from the best in white-collar boxing, live and free at the KO Cup.
Okay, Peter, so I just wanted to talk about the fights this weekend, really. Obviously, the big show headlined by Chisora Parker. I don't really want to talk too much about that fight, but we'll recap it briefly. But it's more something that Chisora said afterwards that I want to drill down into. You know, I think it's really interesting, tells us a lot about boxing at the moment, and tells us a lot of, it's interesting to talk about Chisora in that focus. But obviously, coming into that fight, I think Parker was just about the favourite. Chisora is seen as a bit of a gatekeeper. He's coming off that loss to Usyk, that narrow points loss to Usyk, and obviously Parker was coming in off a win, but he had those previous back-to-back losses against Andy Joshua and Dillian Whyte. So it was a bit of a must-win for Parker in a way. 2 losses on his record now, and coming into the fight, you've got to remember that Dereck had 10 losses, and in a way, I'll come to this in a bit about what Dereck said afterwards. You've got to say to yourself, why is a guy with 10 losses in the normal world of boxing, politics, why is a guy with 10 losses headlining a pay-per-view fight? And the simple answer is, which I'll come to in a bit, is Dereck Chisora. That's why. So, the fight was very close. Chisora scored a knockdown of Parker in the first round, in the first 10 seconds. Usual, came out bringing it like he always does. Ferocious, relentless, coming through. Parker managed to get back in the game. Sweeter, maybe sharper shots. Dereck came on strong at the end. Personally, I only watched it once, but I had Dereck winning, probably ahead by a point. Dillian Whyte said that he thought Chisora was absolutely robbed. He couldn't see how they could give that fight to Parker. And there's no love lost between Dillian Whyte and Dereck Chisora. So that was Whyte's view. Even Eddie Hearn said afterwards that he thought he had Chisora ahead, but the judges gave it. But I think you can't disagree, really, if you boil down to this. I'm not going to scream robbery. If you look at what Parker said afterwards, brilliantly, honest man, really decent guy in boxing. He just said, look, I thought it could have gone either way. I didn't think I had it. I looked at Andy Lee, my cornerman, and said, what do you think? And he was like, I don't know. It's his town. It's his promoter. See what the result is. And it came out in favour of Parker. 2 judges went for Parker. 1 judge went for Chisora. So a split decision loss for Chisora, taking his record to 43 fights with 11 losses. So, in a way, you ask yourself, where does he go from here? I think it's interesting, and what he said afterwards, the interview with Chisora was quite revealing. He said, boxing hates me. He was obviously quite upset. He said, I brought it all, I give it all in the gym, and he is a loyal servant to the game, I think. I give it all, I train hard, I bring the fight to these people, I do all that, and then they do this to me. And he just said, boxing hates me. I'm not going to let them win. I'm going to carry on, And I just thought we'd just take a look at that statement. Boxing hates me. Is he really getting shafted all the time? But as I said, the question mark is then, if he's getting shafted all the time, why is a guy with now 11 losses, headlining pay-per-view? And I think he'll headline pay-per-view again. I don't see why not. It almost doesn't tarnish Dereck Chisora. And this is the amazing thing, because, we've all, over the last few years, especially since Floyd Mayweather's great celebration of it, a loss is devastating to your career. 2 losses kind of end your career. And again, Parker in that interview afterwards was saying, I get to continue my journey now. I'm just so blessed and thankful that it was my night tonight. The fight could have gone either way, but I got the decision, so I can continue my journey. With the obvious intimation that he wasn't going to continue his journey if he lost to Dereck. So that would have been it all over. But it's not over for Chisora. There's talk of a Parker rematch. Parker, again, being the great bloke he is, said, look, I'll give him a rematch, no problem. The fight could have gone either way. Interesting to note, Chisora doesn't tend to do well in rematches. He's not one of those fighters, if you like. If you look at the Tyson Fury, the first fight for the British title way back in 2012 was very close. With the 50-50 going in, it was seen as a very 50-50 fight, and Fury prevailed on the scorecards. In the rematch, it was a shutout, with Chisora's trainer Don Charles pulling him out after round 10. And if you look at the Dillian Whyte fights, nip and tuck in the first fight. Again, a split decision loss for Dereck, which he saw as very unfair. But in the rematch, Whyte stopped him in 11 rounds. So, looking back on Dereck's career, he does not seem to have had the rub of the green in a lot of these situations. And he's now got these 2 back-to-back losses. But look back to 2012, and he had 3 back-to-back losses. And in fact, if you look at he had a run of 5 fights with 4 losses, because he lost that Fury fight, he won his next fight, then he boxed Robert Helenius for the European title away in Helsinki, in his backyard, and everybody thought he won that fight. That was one you could scream robbery at, but the decision went against him. A split decision loss for Dereck Chisora. And then he went in against Vitaly Klitschko in 2012 for the WBC title. In a way, very controversial, as Dereck always is. We go back in his career, he bit Paul Butlin. It was his first suspension, I think his 8th fight. That robbed him of a chance to fight Dereck winning for the British title on that occasion. He also, in that fight, he slapped Vitaly Klitschko at the weigh-in. He spat water in Vladimir Klitschko's face in the ring, But the fight itself was really exciting. And, Vitaly won that fight. But at the end of the fight, he was exhausted. And the bodywork that Chisora put in, Vitaly Klitschko, the great champion, was hanging on against Dereck Chisora in that fight, and in the 12th round, which Chisora carried massively, you almost thought, is he going to stop him here? Can he just take this? It was like a Rocky story. But he lost the fight on points. And then, of course, he had the famous altercation with David Haye. He came out of there. David Haye came into the press conference, started shouting, Chisora got up, went over to him. They had a big melee, camera tripods were being swung around. It was a proper ruck. And, Chisora was arrested the next morning and taken into custody by the German police, released without charge, stripped of his British licence, as was Haye. But then they fought under I'm trying to think now. It's Malta, the Maltese license they got, and they fought at Upton Park, and Haye won that. So he was coming off 3 losses there. So he's always been a controversial bad boy, and he went from the real villain, like I say, biting Paul Butlin, throwing tables at Dylan White, slapping Vitaly Klitschko, so all this sort of stuff. He went from the real villain to being a bit of an anti-hero. Because you kind of thought, this guy has got real pluck. He really comes, he gives it every time, he never rolls over. All right, sometimes he doesn't perform as he might do, as in the second Fury fight, as a great example. But he always generally gives an exciting fight, and especially lately, this run of top contenders, where sometimes he doesn't get the rub of the green. But, I've got to say, I don't think that boxing hates Dereck Chisora. That was his original premise. I think you can't argue with that Parker fight. It could have gone either way. I would say he doesn't get the rub of the green in a lot of these situations. But in a way, boxing loves Dereck Chisora, because we don't look at these losses and say, right, we'll write him off. We want him to come back. We know he's going to be exciting. We will pay in the pay-per-view fight. There is no other fighter in the world that could headline a pay-per-view card with 10 losses to his name. So in a way, we've come to love Dereck Chisora, for that reason, that he never gets the rub of the green. He is the anti-hero. He never, he always stands up for himself. Even in this fight, amazingly in this fight, there was a coin toss to decide who came out first. Obviously coming out second is seen as a bit of advantage and generally the champion's prerogative. And Dereck refused to have a coin toss and said, no, I'm coming out second, and that's that. Then they had a coin toss after Dereck left, and he lost. And Haye was there, and they said, look, you've got to come out first. He was like, right, no fight then. I'm not coming. I'm not playing. And they had to call his mother to placate him. And she apparently is the only person who can get Dereck to really see sense in these situations. So Haye called Chisora's mother. Chisora's called him, his mother. Chisora's mother called him and said, look, you're coming out first, son. Don't worry about it. And he did. So there you go. That's the key to getting Dereck Chisora under control, is to call his mum. I just think great career. Don't forget, he won the ABAs back in 2006. And I can remember when Chisora was one of the kind of brilliant pack of young heavyweights that was coming along at the end of 2009, start of the 2010s. And you had David Price, Sam Sexton, Larry Omabuelu, obviously Tyson Fury, and Dereck Chisora. We were wondering who out of this pack is going to come through. And obviously for a while, Price seemed to pull well ahead, and here we are 13 years later, and obviously everybody else has gone apart from Chisora and Fury. And Fury is obviously the top of the heap, but Chisora is still there. I do call him a gatekeeper, but it only loses to the elite, and he only loses by a fine margin. But he is this enigma in boxing that can shrug off these losses and come back. And I think he will headline another pay-per-view card with Parker. I think that will probably be his next fight. The only thing I want to see Dereck do now, although the thing I don't want to see Dereck do, I want him to be careful about this, is seeing him in these close fights. He's taken a lot of shots. I just don't want to see him carry on too far and become a journeyman, become a gateway. You know, in a way, when he did win the British title in 2010 against Danny Williams, you know, Danny had been there too long. Danny was hanging on and the damage was accumulating. And then he went on just to be a name on people's records. I never want to see Dereck Chisora do that. You know, I think he's too good for that. He deserves to go out. And I think I'd say on top, but, you know, I know he lost that fight, but it was a great performance, as always, from Dereck Chisora. So, you know, I've got to say, Del Boy, I think, you know, boxing loves you. I know your record doesn't say that, and I know these disappointments pile up, but boxing loves you. You've got a very proud career to look back on, you know, and you're the fans' favourite. Even though you never set out to be the fans' favourite, you kind of set out to be the villain. You ended up the fans' favourite. So hats off to Dereck Chisora. That's my answer to what he said. You know, boxing doesn't hate you, Dereck. Boxing loves you. And the only other thing I'll say about that, just to go a little bit off tangent, Peter, on that show, obviously we had the Natasha Jonas-Katie Taylor fight, which was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic, you know, with Taylor coming through with really a sort of display in the championship rounds, showing her class. But Jonas, what an amazing fight, you know, and it was a very narrow points win for Taylor. And I just noticed this week as well, I've seen a lot of people on the forums and stuff saying, you know, I can't take to women's boxing, I don't like women's boxing, all that sort of thing. And some of these kind of stick in the mud. And, you know, we've been quite an advocate of women's boxing and saying it's great and all that sort of stuff. These are the same people, though, that say to me, you know, what I hate is that the best won't fight the best. What I hate is that there's not a unified champion. What I hate is that some of these fights are boring. Well, go and watch women's boxing then. Because there's a slew of fantastic fights all the time at the moment. And look at Katie Taylor, unified champion, always fighting the best. You know, and all right, I know there's a slightly, you know, less depth of talent pool in women's boxing at the moment. But, you know, it's bringing all these things that we always complain about in boxing, you know, to the fore. The best fighting the best, unifying the belts, all that sort of stuff. It's brilliant. That's just a little footnote I wanted to put on, you know, about that show. But, you know, again, really, I just wanted to applaud Dereck Chisora. You know, boxing doesn't hate you, boxing loves you, Dereck.